Good afternoon. How's everyone doing today? Okay, that was pretty good. That was pretty good, actually. Okay. Hello, my name is Saron Yitbarek. Today we're going to talk about the magical living room, how to build authentic and engaged communities. So a little bit about me. I am CEO and founder of NEWBIE. We are the most supportive community of programmers and people who are learning to code. I also host this awesome podcast called the Command Line Heroes. It's a there you go. It's a podcast by Red Hat. It's awesome. We get to explore all kinds of histories and stories about people who do open source, so it's wonderful. And I'm also actually working on a new podcast with IBM called Code Cafe, so make sure to look out for that later this year or early next year. So back to our topic, the magical living room, how to build authentic and engaged communities. So we're going to start with that last word, communities, and what that word means. So for me, when I think about communities, the first community that I was ever a part of was the Ethiopian immigrant community. So I'm Ethiopian. I was born in Ethiopia. When I was 1 year old, my father came to the United States, and then when I was almost 3, my mom and I followed him. And so we grew up in the United States. We're very much in touch with our Ethiopian roots. And we moved to DC, which has a huge Ethiopian immigrant population. And if you think about any immigrant population, you might recognize that it is a more vulnerable one. These are people who traveled many, many miles from a country that they're very familiar with, that they grew up in, to a place where they don't know anyone. They don't know the customs, they don't know the process, they don't know sometimes even the language. And so that's a really, really huge transition for them. And a lot of times they don't necessarily feel welcome. They don't feel safe, they don't really feel wanted. And so for our community, it seemed that there was one place that we always knew we were safe and welcome and wanted, and that was in my mom's living room. My mom was a community builder, and this is something that I really took for granted growing up. I didn't appreciate that she was such a community builder because it made sense that people wanted to hang out with us. We had a nice living room. My mom is a very nice woman. She cooks very good food, so why wouldn't you want to hang out with us? But if I really think about it, there are other people who had bigger living rooms. There are other people who had nice moms who could also cook well. So what was so special about our living room? What made our living room so magical? There are a few things that my mom did to really create that magical living room environment. The first is that she was the first to serve and the last to eat. She was the host of the party, the host of the gathering. And so she would wait and make sure that everyone had their plate, even had their second or third plate, and only once everyone was sitting and eating and laughing and having a good time was she able to then go and feed herself. The second thing that she did was she led by observing. She would sit in the back and she'd watch over everyone and make sure that everyone was happy. And she might notice that, hey, you didn't touch that one dish. Why didn't you touch that one dish? And you'd go, oh, well, it was too spicy. It was just too much. I couldn't really handle it. And she'd make a note of that. And the next time you came to visit, she would have a non-spicy version of that same dish just for you. And it was a really small thing to do. She cooked another dish, doesn't seem like a big deal. But for you, it meant a lot. It made you feel like you mattered, that your opinions were important. The last thing she did was she would solve many problems, but they were many little problems. One example that stands out to me the most is on Thanksgiving. This was a couple years ago. And for Ethiopians, we don't really do Thanksgiving. It's not our holiday, it's an American thing. But because we're in America, we celebrate Thanksgiving. We have, the big dinner. And one Thanksgiving, we forgot to buy the gravy. I know, it's a terrible thing. And so we forgot to buy the gravy and we thought, what are we gonna do? We can't have turkey and mashed potatoes without having the gravy. What are we going to do? And I'm thinking, oh man, the grocery store is closed. Do we have to go to the gas station? Are we gonna get gas station gravy? What is gonna happen? And my mom said, don't worry, I'm gonna figure this out. And she goes into the kitchen, she gets some flour, some spices, some turkey juice, is that what you call it? And she whips together the most amazing gravy you've ever had. Now, this may not seem a big deal to you if you're born, raised in America and you celebrate Thanksgiving as a family, a lifelong family tradition. But for us, we don't eat gravy. We don't even really have turkey in Ethiopia. So the fact that this little immigrant woman just figured out how to make gravy while everyone was standing around in the kitchen watching her do it was amazing to me. But that's what she did. She solved these little problems, always solving these little problems. Now, if you think about these steps and you abstract them, you'll come up with this loop that goes understanding, building, learning, iterating. And these steps hopefully look familiar to you as developers, as technologists. These are the steps we use when we build products. We understand who our users are, we build for them, we learn from them, and then we iterate and we make it even better. This is a product development loop that also applies to community building. And if you think about the examples I shared with you, none of them were particularly huge. All of them were, frankly, food related. But even in these little examples, she showed you that she cared about you, that you were safe, you were welcome, and you were wanted. So fast forward many years later, I am now an adult, and I decide that I want to get into code. That's what I look like when I decide I want to get into code. It's very scruffy. And so I decided that I wanted to get into coding, and so I decided to teach myself for a couple months. Then I was enrolled in a program called the Flatiron School. And when I graduated, I felt so good. I felt so powerful. I jumped up, clicked my heels, and held up a keyboard. And I said to myself, I know everything about code. Coding is great. Now I get to finally be a developer. But the process of becoming a developer, for me, cost $11,000 and many months without a salary. Now, fortunately, I could afford to do that. But that's a lot of money and a lot of time for folks who are less fortunate, folks who might be struggling. And so when I thought about the real value of that $11,000, it wasn't just the curriculum and the coding, it was really the community. So here's what I knew. I knew that community was key to that coding journey, but it was also incredibly inaccessible to most people. So I decided that I was going to do something about it. I was going to build the Code Newbie Twitter chat. So show of hands if you know what a Twitter chat is. Show of hands, show of hands, show of hands. Okay, that's pretty good. So a Twitter chat is when you use a hashtag. So for us, it was Code Newbie. And you join at a particular hour, some time of the week. So for us, it was Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern time. And we would pick a topic. So it might be, for example, debugging. And then we would talk about that for an hour. And it would be us from the Code Newbie account moderating, giving out the questions. And then anyone using the hashtag to participate, to join in, to share information, share stories, and it became a really, really great tool for the community. But when you're putting together a Twitter chat, how do you make a magical Twitter chat? How do you do one specifically for the newbie community, for people who are just getting started? For us, we started with some rules, some 3 rules that we began every single chat with. You had to be nice, you had to be supportive, and you had to be helpful. And those were the 3 rules. And we started every single Twitter chat with these 3 rules. And it did a couple things. Number 1, it set the tone. So you knew right when you walked in that this was a place where we did not tolerate meanness. We only expected you to be on your best behavior. But it did something else. It also signaled to people that, hey, this is a safe space for you. If you're out in the world and you're worried about being trolled, if you're worried about people looking down on you because you're new, if you feel self-conscious, we're signaling to you that that won't happen here, that this is a safe space for you. The other thing we did is we were aggressively, disgustingly nice. Now for this, what I mean is when people would tweet at us and say, hey, I got my first job, we would tweet them so many huggy smiley faces. And when they said, hey, I just interviewed and I'm really nervous about it, but I think it went okay, I'm not sure how it went, we would give them so many heart emojis. And when they said, you know, I did my first pull request for an open source project, they would get so many exclamation points filled with love. That's what we did. We were aggressively, disgustingly nice. Because frankly, that's what our community needs. They need that. They need to feel overly loved. They need that huge joy. They needed cheerleaders in their lives. So this happened for, I think, about a year. And things were going great. People loved the Twitter chat. They were really into the conversation, the quality of the discussion, but they were also excited about all the people they were meeting. They got to connect with potential employers. They got to connect with mentors. They got to connect with people who just wanted to help, who were going through the same struggles they were. And so once this chat started picking up, though, I started to get messages from people who said, hey, I love what you're doing, but I can't participate because I'm asleep. When you're doing your chat on Wednesdays at 9 p.m., it's 3 o'clock in the morning for me. Or it's 7 o'clock in the morning, I'm taking my kids to school. I can't participate, and I wish there was a way for me to join in. So I learned about time zones. And I learned, like most developers do, that time zones are a problem, whether you're coding or not. And so I said to myself, okay, we need to do something to solve this time zone problem. So we iterated and we created a second morning chat. So this happened at 11 a.m. Pacific time, 2 p.m. Eastern time, and it was on Sunday, so we picked a weekend this time to make it more accessible. And we had a coding check-in. So this was kind of like an accountability system. Every Sunday you would say what you were working on that week and what you had done the previous week, and it was a small little way of making sure that you were holding yourself accountable, and people would share their goals and share their accomplishments. And there was this wonderful 30-minute chat that can help you get started on your next week. So here's the thing. If those people who messaged me hadn't spoken up, we would not have these Sunday morning chats. That idea did not come from me. It came from the community. So Code Newbie's going well, everything's going great. But what I learned from doing these Twitter chats is that Twitter chats are a really great way to have a lot of conversations, multiple threads in one go, but it's not a great way to dig deep, to dive into a particular topic, or to hear a particular story. It gets too crowded, too noisy. Now, I wanted to find out what's a better medium for doing that. And my first job out of college was actually working at NPR. And so I thought audio, storytelling via audio, podcasting is a really great tool for that. Now, when I looked at the landscape for technical podcasts, I saw that there's lots of technical content, but there weren't a lot of technical stories. If I wanted to learn about Vue.js, there's probably a podcast, multiple podcasts on Vue.js. But if I wanted to hear from the creator of Vue.js and how it came to be and a little bit more about the industry, that was a lot harder to find. So I wanted to find these technical stories, and I wanted to highlight the journey of being a developer and not just the code itself. So I built the Code Newbie podcast. But if you're targeting a community of people who are just getting started and they are unfamiliar with tech, you're trying to ramp them up, how do you create a magical podcast? Well, there are a couple things that this community really needs. The first is they need validation that they belong. In tech, there tends to be two dominant narratives. The first is that you were kind of born with a computer. You had a computer since you were 2. You had your first open source project when you were 12. You've just been going hard. You're like, king, queen of Stack Overflow. You got all the points. And that's kind of who you are. But the second narrative are folks who got a computer science degree in undergrad and who interned at the top tech companies and now are working for a Google or maybe a Red Hat and who are working at these top tech firms. So what about everyone else? Because there are many other ways of getting into tech that you just don't hear about. So we wanted to highlight those stories. This is a little snapshot of all the different people we've had on the show. And as you can tell, we not only are incredibly diverse and inclusive in demographic ways, we have people from all different genders and backgrounds and different geographic locations and all that, but we also have people who got into tech many different ways. People who used to be janitors, babysitters, journalists who learned how to code. People who got into it from being a designer for many years. People who got into it from being in tech marketing and then transitioned into code. People who got into it in many, many different ways. We highlighted those stories. The second thing is that our community needs validation that they can do this. There's this huge level of insecurity that happens when you're first starting to learn to code. It can be incredibly, incredibly intimidating. And it gets better, I think, as you become more technical, but it's still there. This question of, do I belong and can I really do this? But this is particularly loud and noisy when you're first starting out. So there are many ways that you can address this, but the way that I addressed it in the podcast is that I would ask questions in a very particular way. The way I approach hosting when I'm doing interviews is I try and channel my audience. I try and put my audience hat on and I say, okay, if I'm listening in my car, on my way to work, on my way to school, what do I want to know? What are the gaps for me? What am I most interested in? And the same question applies when the guest says something that might be too technical, that might be something that's hard for people to understand. So for example, a guest might casually talk about TDD, test-driven development. And they might casually go about it, fit it into a long paragraph of things, and it's my job to go, wait a minute, what is TDD? Now there's a couple ways you can ask that question. You can say, hey, for people who don't know, what is TDD? And that's a perfectly fair way of asking that question. But what I try to do is I try to go, hey, can you tell me what TDD is? even if it's something I'm unfamiliar with, even if it's something that I already know, I know that my guests, my audience probably doesn't know that thing. And so I ask for my audience. I take on that role. And so when I do that, I'm doing something very, very subtle. When you say, oh, it got really quiet. Thank you, person who closed the door. Appreciate you. So when you say to someone, hey, can you explain what TDD is for people who don't know? What you're really saying is, you know what TDD is. I know what TDD is. The people who are listening should know what TDD is, but they don't. So can we help them out? But instead, when you say, can you tell me what TDD is? You're making it okay. You're validating this idea that that may be a new concept, a new term for people. The last thing that I do that I really try and focus on is I try to get out of the way. I am the least important person on my podcast. I do not matter. My job is to guide the conversation, to bring out the best in our podcast guests. But it's not really about me, and I'm going to prove that to you. If you look here, this is an interview we did with Chad Fowler, season 5, episode 8. And if you look at that top track, that's me. And if you look at that bottom track, that's Chad. Chad likes to talk. And if you look at that top track, it's not even really me asking questions. A lot of those audio waves are me going, mm-hmm, and mm. And if you ever want to be a podcast host, that's really all you need to do. Just go, mm-hmm, mm. And you're good to go. And I'm going to do another example. This is Scott Hanselman in episode 17. Same thing. Scott's on the bottom. I'm on the top. Scott talks more than Chad. Same deal. Me going and me guiding the conversation. But really, it's all about Scott. It's about giving him an opportunity to shine and an opportunity for our audience to learn from him. So the podcast is going great. People are loving it. They're saying that they're learning so much. They're feeling really validated. They feel like their own journeys are being highlighted, and things are going wonderfully. And then this happened. We launched a new show called the BCS Podcast. And this one was all about teaching computer science topics in short 20-minute episodes. And in the show, it's myself and my co-host, Vaidehi Joshi, and she wrote this very popular blog series called BCS. And what she did is she does not have a computer science background, and she decided that she wanted to teach herself computer science. And so every week for 1 year, she learned a new computer science topic. She taught herself, and then she wrote about it. And I remember when she first started me thinking, that's a big project. We'll see if you finish it. But then she did finish it. And I said, holy crap, this is amazing. What an incredible resource for people who are also learning and wanting to learn computer science. And so I reached out to her and I said, can we turn this into a podcast? You can be the teacher. I'll be the student. We'll do a little role playing. And you can teach me computer science in a 20-minute episode. And we launched. And it went great. People loved the show. They loved the premise of it. They loved our chemistry. But then I got this one email from a listener who said, hey, really love your show, because the thing is, I'm blind. And a lot of technical resources just aren't accessible to me. I can't use them because they involve reading, viewing images, viewing code. And so I just can't use them. And this is one of the few resources that I can use because I can't see. And I read that and I thought, wow, I never thought of podcasting as an accessibility solution, as an accessibility tool. This is fascinating. It's very humbling. But it made me think, what about all the people that can't hear? What are we doing to make our podcast accessible to them? So that email really taught me about accessibility in the context of podcasting. And so we took that information and we iterated and we created transcripts. So now all of our episodes, both the Code Newbie podcast and the BCS podcast, they all come with transcripts. Now here's the thing. If that one person hadn't spoken up, we wouldn't have transcripts. That was not an idea that came from me. That was an idea that came from our community. So we've got 3 projects going on. We've got the BCS podcast, the Code Newbie podcast, and the Code Newbie Twitter chats. Now you might notice that all these things are online, which is great. That makes them incredibly accessible. That means that anybody with an internet connection can join, they can take that content, they can participate, and that is a great thing to have. But the truth is, in-person connections are just so valuable. And I think you can appreciate that because you're all here at a conference. There's something really special about being in person. There's something really valuable about that experience. And conferences have always been a huge part of my development as a developer. They've been a really big part of my career, of my ability to simply network, make new friends. But what I understood is that most conferences aren't great for newbies. They're not really designed for that community. So I decided I was going to do something about it, and I'm going to build a conference, and it's going to be called Codeland. But what makes a magical conference, especially for our community? How do you make a specially designed magical conference for them? Well, the first thing that you need to do is you need to have a conference where people can follow and understand the talks. Now, this might seem really obvious. After all, why have a talk if people can't follow it? But for the beginner audience, this is a huge pain point. Because the thing is, when talks are labeled Intro to or TDD 101, it's not really for people who are new to tech. It's for people who are new to that technology, which is different. We all know that that first programming language we learn is the hardest one. After that, adding isn't really that big of a deal. We just learn a little bit more and maybe it takes some time, but definitely not as hard as learning that first language. So when we're moving between technologies and we're adding technologies onto our personal stack, it's not as painful. But when you have no stack at all, it's a really painful experience. So how do you make sure that all of these talks are understandable to our community? Well, we created these conference booklets, which I'm very, very proud of. These conference booklets are an accompaniment to the conference. And they're full of a couple things. They're full of what you'd expect from a conference program. They have the abstract, bio, a photo of the speaker, but it also has terms and resources. So as a speaker, as I'm going through my really complex code, I'm going through my process for building it, you'll be able to follow along with me. You'll see a list of all the terms that I use in my talk and the definitions. So if I say something in passing that you're not familiar with, that's okay. You can pause, you can take a look down at your booklet, and you're able to pick up where you left off. And if you want to learn more about what I talk about, if you want to learn about more resources, that's available in the conference booklet as well. The other thing that I really focused on with newbies is that newbies need to know the why. When you're first starting, that context is incredibly important. It's hard to get excited about technology just for the sake of technology because you're not quite there yet. You can't really appreciate the tech for the tech. You need to understand the application of it. That becomes really, really important, especially at the beginning. We need to have the context. Why am I using this? Where am I using this? Who does this affect? All those things add up to a why that's incredibly important. So how do you make sure that each talk has that why? Well, you work with every single speaker, and that's what I did. I worked with each and every one of our speakers, averaging about 3 to 4 hours per talk. And I made sure that they felt prepared, that they addressed that why, and that they felt confident in speaking about their topic. And we wrote the story of the talk together, we did the outline together, we worked on the slides together, and we rehearsed together. And that allowed me to do some quality control and really make sure that the talks were catered and designed for this newbie audience. The third and final thing we focused on was making sure this conference was financially accessible. This is a huge deal. As you all know, conferences are very expensive. Ticket prices range from a couple hundred to thousands of dollars, but even if the tickets are free, the cost of going to a conference is very expensive. The hotels, the flight, the childcare that you have to pay, all these things add up to quite a bunch of money. And a lot of folks, probably a lot of you here, get sponsorships from your companies. They pay for you to be here, or they at least subsidize your trip. But for our community, people who aren't at those tech companies yet, they're still working as a teacher, they're still working as a journalist, they don't have that company support. So they're always paying out of pocket. So what we decided to do to help alleviate some of that financial burden is we created a scholarship. We called it the Opportunity Scholarship. And this not only gave you a heavily discounted ticket, but it paid for your flight, your childcare, and your hotel. Basically any of the expenses you need covered to make sure you can get to the conference and you can enjoy this experience. And we were able to bring over 150 people to Codeland over the past 2 years. So things are going great. People love this conference. People say that they're making new friends, they're learning about new tools, new technologies, they're having a great time. But here's the thing about conferences. There's a lot you can get right, but a whole lot more that you can get wrong. And unlike a product, you can't deploy a new build of a conference, right? Once it's out there, it's kind of done, that's it. You have to wait a year to figure out what went wrong and how to fix it. So here are all the things that I missed. Here are all the things that I learned from that first conference. I learned that I should have had closed captioning. That was something that didn't occur to me, didn't think about it at all. Someone brought it up maybe a couple weeks before the conference started and they said, hey, are you gonna do closed captioning? And I thought, ooh, I wish I thought of that sooner. Childcare was another big one. Didn't think about childcare. As someone who doesn't have kids, that just wasn't top of mind for me. Didn't think about it. Dietary restrictions. This one we actually did a pretty good job on because we did ask people what their dietary requirements were, and we made sure that we had food that accounted for everyone and that gave them what they needed. But what we forgot was to label the food. So no one knew what they could eat and what they couldn't eat. Feels like a very minor detail, changed the whole lunch experience for everyone. The last one was photography and privacy. So this one actually came to me from a tweet. So this is a tweet by Stephanie Hurlbert, who's pretty big in the gaming and compression space. And she tweeted, I love this idea for events and conferences. It helps some people feel more comfortable, but it would have helped me attend events at all after I escaped an abusive relationship and was worried about stalking. I wasn't able to go to any events for months. And that sign that you see says, please do not photograph attendees with this sticker. And that tweet came to my attention from this other tweet by a woman named Hunter, and she says, hey Code Newbies, maybe you all can do something like this for Codeland. Just a simple yes or no on whether a person wants a sticker at check-in would be super easy. And I said, yes, Hunter, it would be super easy. So next year was my chance to fix all these things. Codeland 2018 was on its way and I'm gonna get everything right. So I iterated and I got that closed captioning. We had a childcare fund to help subsidize childcare costs for people. We got those labels for those the dietary restrictions for lunch. And we had those stickers for photography and privacy. But here's the thing. If all those people hadn't spoken up, we wouldn't have a better conference. So at the end of Codeland 2018, I give my closing remarks, I thank everyone for being there, and I tell them about all the things that we'd gotten wrong that first year. And I said, thank you so much for all of your feedback, for all of your input. It's because of you that we're able to make a better, a stronger conference this time. Thank you all so much. If you have any additional feedback, please let me know. Very welcome, very excited to hear it. So back to my room, conference is over, sitting at my desk, sitting at my computer. I open my email. My inbox is full of all the things that I missed that year. So here are a few of them. One person talked about having environmentally friendly options. So what we did the first year and the second year was we had a lot of water bottles because water bottles are portable. They're really easy. You just grab them, you go. There won't be any bottlenecks, any huge lines for water. And my one thing when it came to the conference is I wanted to make sure everyone was hydrated. It was very important to me. So water bottles seemed like a great solution. Didn't really think about all the plastic that we were using by having water bottles. And someone brought that to my attention. The other thing was a prayer room. This was something that didn't occur to me until someone actually noticed a couple women who were looking for a private space at the conference to pray, something that didn't occur to me. The third is someone requested a low-carb lunch. Okay, so let me explain this one. There was one lunch called the Summer Picnic. I was very excited about this lunch. It was fried chicken, mashed potatoes, mac and cheese, cornbread, potato salad, all the good stuff. And I'm thinking this lunch is gonna be a hit. Turns out it's very, very heavy. And when you're sitting in it's a one-track conference, when you're sitting in a conference room for 8-9 hours, sitting in that one chair, you get sleepy, it gets warm with all those human bodies in a room, and you get a little sleepy and it's harder to stay awake if your stomach is full of mashed potatoes. Didn't think about that. I just thought it was a really great lunch. Another piece of feedback we got that, again, would never have occurred to me was someone requested having bigger seats. This was a larger woman, and she said, look, I was physically uncomfortable the whole conference because your seats are just too small. And I thought, yeah, I would never have thought about thinking about furniture and how the furniture experience is for attendees. Now, you might look at this list and go, well, these aren't deal breakers, they're not huge. But for the people experiencing them, they are a really big deal. This was a list of all the things that I didn't think about. And I felt so grateful for all of their feedback. Then I got this email from this one woman who gave some very thorough feedback. And she said, these are all the things you can improve next year. And I responded and I said, thank you so much for your feedback. Very, very helpful. In fact, it was so helpful that you should go to other people's conferences, sit in the audience, experience them, and give them feedback. We'd have so much better conferences if we did that. And she said to me, oh no, I don't do this for everybody. I did this for you because I know that you'll do something about it. And this was very interesting to me because it reframed all this feedback that I had received. This wasn't an inbox full of all the things I'd gotten wrong. It was an inbox full of people who believed that I cared enough to fix it. But how do they know? A lot of the work of a community builder, a community organizer, is in the dark. No one sees me lugging hundreds of booklets to my car, hoping they're going to fit in my suitcase. No one sees the individual DMs of people who have different concerns and questions about the conference. No one sees all the hours I put in working with each and every one of our speakers to make sure they feel ready and equipped for their big day. No one sees all these things. They're not done in front of an audience. So how do they know? The only interactions that they see are really small ones. They see little individual tweets. They see the occasional announcement, maybe the occasional email blast, but that's really it. There's nothing I can point to say, look at this thing right here. I did this. This proves to you that you can trust me. There's no app to point to. There's no product to point to. There's no repo to point to. So how do they know? There were just a lot of little things that I've been doing for a really long time. And that's because it's really about these small, consistent acts that build trust. That's what community building is really all about. It's about constantly going through this loop of understanding, building, listening, iterating, even when no one is watching, even when people have no idea that you're going through this loop. No matter how big or how small the thing is, this loop is incredibly important. This is what real community building looks like. This is how you make people feel safe and welcome and wanted. Being part of a community is amazing. It's a beautiful, beautiful feeling to find people who are just like you, who care about the things you care about, who share your values, who can help you grow and support you into being a better person, a better developer. But for the organizer, it's just a lot of work. And it's a lot of work that never seems to end. And I remember as a kid watching my mom running around at every single gathering, every single meal, and she'd always collapse into a chair afterwards. And she'd go, oh, I'm so tired. And she would kill me for doing that accent, but that is very, very accurate. It's exactly what she sounded like. And I would look at her and I would go, oh man, I never want to do that. That looks like a lot of work. You know how when you grow up and you find yourself slowly becoming like one of your parents? Like you start kind of like saying things the way they do and you have gestures the way they have gestures. And even the way I pick up the phone and say, hi, how are you? It's exactly like the way my mom does it. But when it comes to building a community, all I ever wanted was to be like her. All I want is to make you feel safe and welcome and wanted. Thank you.